Hi friends, welcome back, or welcome if you're new here. My name is Stacy and I am the chapter Conundrum. And I have noticed this trend lately when I've been reflecting on my reading. I very rarely love the third book in a trilogy. Almost always, without fail, book one or book two is my favorite. And I want to talk about it today. I'm curious to know if any of you guys out there have very similar reading experiences, or if you have noticed this trend with your own reading. I'm also very curious to get some recommendations from you guys where book three in the trilogy was your favorite. So before we jump into all of the trilogies I have read where book three is definitely my least favorite or definitely not my favorite of the series, let's talk about the one example I can think of where book three is my favorite. And that, of course, would be the Poppy War trilogy. And this is a hot take because a lot of people do not love Burning God. But when I read this, I gave the Poppy War 4 stars, Dragon Republic 4.5 stars, and then Burning God was a full 5-star read for me. The ending gave me literal chills when I read this. It was the kind of book where I just had to stop and sit with it for a while. And that usually doesn't happen to me very often. I'm usually someone who, when I'm in a book, I'm very in it, but then I can kind of move on very quickly and get into the next thing. This one definitely didn't give me that experience. So I think partly my experience with the series was book one sort of takes its time to establish the world and the characters, and it's a lot of like training stuff. So book one is just more slow moving in terms of like extra plot intrigue. Book two is fantastic. Definitely a lot of interesting stuff here that got my attention and that I really enjoyed reading. But also the main core of like the direction of the plot in this one felt sort of familiar. Book three, though, when I picked this up, this was kind of like my first foray into grimdark and what that could look like. So it was definitely an all-new experience for me. And I really just gravitated towards seeing Rin, the main character, grappling with all of the choices that she made in the earlier books and the consequences of those choices. And I really enjoyed the new conflicts or like the new situations that sort of came up along the ride with this one, because they definitely didn't feel familiar or something close to what I had read before. So yeah, this is the one trilogy I can think of where it just got better and better and better for me, and where book three was my legitimate favorite. So now let's talk about some of the trilogies where book three was not my favorite. So the first one I'm going to grab here is Night Angel by Brent Weeks. And this starts with Way of Shadows, goes into Shadow's Edge, and then goes into Beyond the Shadows. So for me, The Way of Shadows is a 5-star read. I think this had one of the most intricate plots I had ever read, and I also really loved that that was coupled with a character who's just like experiencing things for the first time, very reactive and thoughtful about the experiences he's having, and definitely going through emotions alongside those experiences. I think it was really interesting to see Brent Weeks have a lot of concepts and ideas come out in this one. He definitely had a clear direction and vision for this book and how it wanted to go. And then we jumped into book two, Shadow's Edge, and the plot in this one takes a turn. So I did not love the direction the plot took in this one for the first half. This is definitely a case of middle book syndrome too. Like there's just not that much going on here, not as much development as I was hoping in terms of the overall story. I still liked it, but definitely it did not hold up to book one. And then book three, I really enjoyed seeing how this concluded, but definitely it didn't grip me the same way that book one did. So Night Angel, clear case of the first book was the best for me. Next up, I've grabbed The Drowning Empire by Andrea Stewart. So book one, Bone Shard Daughter, I picked up and really enjoyed. I thought that the world building in here was excellent. I thought the setting was very unique. The political aspects in this kingdom were interesting, but the real shining stars of this series are the magic system and some of the animal companions. So being introduced to those things here in book one was definitely exciting. And I did enjoy the foreshadowing that was layered into book one too. I enjoyed seeing things come to fruition later on in the book. In book two, we have a romance I did not ship, which I think is a big part of the reason that this one did not work as well for me. I also thought that the character motivations in here just weren't as well explained as I wanted them to be. We sort of have one character who changes their mind on something, and I didn't really understand their thought process and how we made that change or how we got from point A to point B. And so I think that that choice influencing the plot as much as it did was tricky for me. And then book 3, Bone Shard War, I liked more than book 2, but I just didn't like it as much as book 1. I think it also suffered from just having things not be quite as explained or as nuanced as I wanted in terms of character motivations and character choices. But I also thought that a lot of the foreshadowing layered into book 1 was more interesting. Like, I had a lot more theories about where things could go in this series, or what things she might introduce based on things mentioned in book 1. And book 3, while it was interesting, didn't really lean into answering a lot of those unresolved things. And it was more about the core plot of the series. So while I still liked it, it didn't work as well for me, and definitely Bone Shard Daughter stands as my favorite of this trilogy. So next up, I've grabbed Mistborn Era 1 by Brando Sando. And of course, Mistborn Final Empire is definitely my favorite of this series. So I think a big part of the reason that I was drawn to this series was the magic system of Allomancy. And of course, Mistborn or Final Empire definitely shows off Allomancy, slowly explains how things work while allowing you to have theories about how the magic can be utilized. And that was very intriguing. Also, book 1 sort of follows more of a contained heist plot, which I also typically really enjoy. Book 2, Well of Ascension, dove more into like the political aspects of the world and sort of expanded the scope of things. And I did still really enjoy book 2. And I also enjoyed getting some answers to things that were foreshadowed in book 1, but I also thought the pacing of this one was much slower. And if you know me, I'm more of a plot reader who enjoys quicker pacing. So while I liked this one, it didn't work as well for me. And then we have Hero of Ages. And I think the best way to sum this up spoiler free is that the biggest reason that I love Brandon Sanderson is that he is definitely a planner. He considers a lot of logical things when he's writing his books, and he definitely takes time to sort of give you more nuance and information about the plot threads that are happening. But there's a plot thread in here that just does not feel very tangible, and that you don't feel like you had a ton of context for up front. I still feel like I don't fully understand how that happened. Maybe I need a reread where I like pinpoint a lot more detail. But yeah, this definitely wasn't it for me. Book 1, Mistborn or Final Empire, stands as my favorite in this trilogy as well. All right, next up, I have grabbed The Themis Files by Sylvain Neuvel. So Sleeping Giants, Waking Gods, and Only Human. So my experience with Sleeping Giants was good. I enjoyed reading this. I definitely thought that the first book sort of took its time to introduce you to what's happening in the world. It's a full cast narration, so you definitely take some time to get to know the characters and each of their situations. And basically the catalyst for the beginning of this story is that a giant hand is found. And so in book 1, you're really piecing together like the ramifications of this find and what it could mean. Whereas in book 2, you're sort of getting a lot more answers and reveals for things pertaining to that. You're getting a little bit more of the characters being creative, trying to figure out a lot of situations. And I really found that satisfying. I enjoyed seeing a lot of the foreshadowing in book 1 come to fruition in book 2. And then book 3 started, and it started off in a direction I thought I was going to really be interested in. But then the direction it starts in is not very focused on. I felt like I had so many questions about things that I was excited to explore with this, and then it abruptly changed direction, and I was very frustrated about that. So there was a subplot in here I was rooting for that never happened for reasons, and I definitely felt like this one was a case of I envisioned the series going a certain way, and it completely derailed from that idea and gave me something I was way less excited about. So this one just didn't work as well for me. And I think in this one, Waking Gods, book 2 is my favorite of the trilogy. So next up, I have grabbed the Bargainer series by Laura Thalassa, and I've got the novella in here too because I just grabbed the whole thing off my shelf at once. But book 1 is Rhapsodic, book 2 is Strange Hymn, we've got the novella Emperor of Evening Stars, and then book 3 Dark Harmony. So my reading experience with this. Book 1 is very interesting. It introduces a premise, but it's a very slow burn in terms of introducing the plot. You spend a lot of time getting to know the characters in multiple timelines, and it's really a character-focused book. Book 2 is where the meat of the plot of the series kicks in. This is where the tension ratchets up. This is where you start having a lot more questions about things. The world has expanded. You're just a lot more intrigued about what's going on. And you still have some great character moments. It's more balanced in terms of plot and character work for sure. The novella was great as well. I'll just give it a shout out. It has some interesting character work and a lot of answers to some questions about characters' backstories that I was intrigued by. And then book 3 focused a lot more on the romance. So this one had plot, and it was interesting plot. However, the plot was almost like filtered through the romance in this one. So like you have these characters in tense, dangerous situations, but they're more concerned with each other than they are with the situation, and that's kind of a little bit frustrating for me. Like I wanted them to have more realistic reactions to things that were happening. And so definitely I felt like book 2, they had realistic reactions, the plot was interesting and things were happening, and definitely book 2, Strange Hymn, is my favorite of this series. So next up, I have a few series that started as trilogies, so I'm going to include them even though they have expanded beyond trilogies now. So the first of those is going to be a John Cleaver by Dan Wells. So I'm Not a Serial Killer, Mr. Monster, and I Don't Want to Kill You. So starting this one, I really enjoyed my time with I Am Not a Serial Killer. I liked getting to know the main character and just having the plot and the conflict slowly introduced in this one. But Mr. Monster is definitely where you get a lot more answers. The scope of things expands once again. It has a lot more tension, a lot more action. It felt a lot more pulse pounding, like the stakes in this one just felt a lot higher for the character. And the villain in this one is just something else. This is the kind of villain that I have a visceral reaction to that just like, oh, I need to read it because I'm so interested to see how the characters overcome the situations they're put in. And then book 3, I Don't Want to Kill You, was also good, but it just did not have the same appeal to it that Mr. Monster did. I felt like the stakes in this one, while they were high and while there were tense moments, like book 3 felt like it was high stakes and tense throughout. This one felt like it had moments of high stakes and tension, but I just don't have the same love for it that I do as Mr. Monster. So this is a case where book 2 is my standout fave. Next up, we have one of my all-time favorite series, the Red Rising series, and this started as a trilogy too, so I'm going to talk about it. So in this case, book 1 introduces our main character and his situation, and while it's interesting and entertaining and I liked it, book 2 is really where things get crazy. Book 1 has a fairly contained plot, and the stakes do feel there, but book 2, the stakes get a lot higher, the scope of things is a lot bigger, you learn a lot more, you get a lot of reveals and answers to things you're wondering about from book 1. You just get a lot more information, and it's very interesting. And I would say it's more plot focused. Book 3 is still fantastic and definitely has some great plot moments, but I think the heart of book 3 is really the character moments. And while I enjoyed that and still love this book, I just don't have the same love for it that I do for Golden Sun. I think too, like, Golden Sun was where things really started to surprise me. And in this one, I sort of knew more of what to expect. Like, book 2 is really where I started getting excited about the direction that things were taking. Whereas book 3, I still liked it, and it was still a fantastic book. But it's just not Golden Sun. So next up, I have grabbed the Hunger Games trilogy by Suzanne Collins. And in this one, book 1 is my favorite for sure. I think this is a case of a trilogy where the concept of the Hunger Games and just the nature of it, like the high stakes, pulse pounding tension of this, is really what had me hooked. I needed to binge this so I could find out what was going to happen. And book 2, we start off with a lot more slower character moments, and then we get into the more like high stakes, pulse pounding stuff, which I also really liked. But I just really liked how book 1 made me feel. Book 2 was excellent, but book 1 just really focused on things I was more interested in. And then Mockingjay, the direction of the series, well, it makes sense in terms of story, it just feels so different. And while I still liked it, it definitely did not have the same appeal for me that these two did. And I think that's a pretty common opinion. I also felt like the character work was more interesting in the first two. I feel like in the first book especially, Katniss is more genuine to herself. And then in book 2 and 3, she starts kind of having to think more about how other people are perceiving her. And she's more conscientious of that instead of just being her authentic self. And I think her story for me was more interesting when she was just not worried about it and just being herself. So for those reasons, Hunger Games is still my favorite of this trilogy. Next up, we can talk about the Scythe trilogy by Neal Shusterman. So Scythe, book 1, is one that introduces some really cool concepts. And while this is YA, it's one that sort of straddles the line between YA and adult. It does have a lot more adult-veering content than a lot of YA books would have. But anyways, Scythe was really cool in that it introduced a lot of interesting things. I loved the world building in here, and I especially loved getting the characters' very personal reactions to the situations that they were put in. In book 2, Thunderhead, the pacing definitely slows down. It's more of kind of a slow build pacing to an explosive ending. Whereas in book 1, Scythe, the pacing is more even. And while I really enjoyed both of these books, Scythe edges it out for sure. And then in book 3, The Toll, things just expand in scope a lot more, and it goes in some directions that I was just less interested in, honestly. I think the strength of the series was definitely in book 1 and 2, and I wish that book 3 had just had a different focus. I think this is also a case of a book 1 and 2 have enough foreshadowing layered in to where you can have theories about where the story should go or could go, and I think that made the direction that the story did go in book 3 all the more disappointing, because if you are theorizing about where it can go, like, all of your theories would be more interesting than what actually happened, I think. Or at least if you were going to keep the same direction of how things actually did happen, give it more build up or more nuance to get there, because I felt like it was kind of very abrupt, and that didn't necessarily work in its favor, at least to my enjoyment. So next up, we're going to talk about the Broken Empire trilogy by Mark Lawrence. So Prince of Thorns, King of Thorns, and Emperor of Thorns. And in this trilogy, book 1 is definitely my favorite. But I also think it's common for people to say that book 2 is their favorite, and I can definitely see why. So this series follows Jorg, and he is not a good dude. He is a very villainous character. And I think the joy of this series for me is unpacking sort of the psychology of why he is the way he is. What happened to him to mess him up so badly that he thinks the way he thinks, or he acts the way he acts? Why does he have the quirks he has? And this series is told in 2 timelines, and they're set 4 years apart. So a lot of the time, you're very intrigued about, okay, how do we get from point A to point B within those timeline snippets as well? So I thought that book 1 was definitely the most interesting here. I think part of the appeal of book 1 for me was just that it was one of my very early experiences with something grimdark. And so part of my love for it was just how it made me feel reading, or like having this type of newer experience reading was more of an exciting thing. And then book 2, I still really enjoyed, and I loved that it played with the amnesia trope. So Jorg has amnesia, and he's slowly piecing together his memories, and you do get more answers as to his backstory and why he is the way he is. And it's a revenge story, so it plays into things I liked. But then it also introduces something that just didn't work as well for me. And then part of the focus of book 3 is on this thing. And again, it's something that's kind of not very tangible or not very logical, if you will. And so I think I kind of struggled with that. Like, I feel like if you're going to have something like that in your series be like part of the big ending, I want kind of more lead up to it or more explanation for it. And so in this case, book 1 is definitely my favorite, with book 2 being my second favorite. And book 3, it just, I don't know, it wasn't it for me. It was still good, I still liked it, but it just didn't have the same appeal. Next up, we could talk about the Founders Trilogy by Robert Jackson Bennett. So Foundryside, Shorefall, and Locklands. And this one at Foundryside is definitely my clear favorite. So in book one, we have more of a contained heist plot with a sentient magical object. And I definitely loved those things. I thought that the banter between Clef and Sancha was really great. And heist plot, I'm a sucker for that. It's definitely entertaining and interesting to see how the characters get creative and overcome obstacles towards pulling off this heist. In book two, the scope of things gets bigger, but I didn't enjoy it as much in this case. And I think it's partly because I didn't really feel like I got the full context or the full explanation for things. There is a time skip in between book one and two that I think sort of plays into why it didn't work as well for me. I definitely felt like I had to sort of reorient myself in this world. And then when you go into Locklands from Shorefall, there's a huge time skip. I think it's like 10 years, and things look very different. So it's very much that feeling of having to reorient yourself again. And I think in Locklands, kind of the highlight is the ingenuity of the magic system and how it's now being used. And it was really interesting to see Robert Jackson Bennett's creativity and how that magic could be implemented. But I think it really suffered from A, having to be reoriented in what's happening, and B, because of that, you didn't have as much time to really explain sort of the nuance of how we got there or how this was all working. In book one, it's just less complicated. It's still complex, but you definitely felt like you had a sense of how things worked or why they made sense. In book three, I didn't have that feeling, and so I just didn't enjoy it the same way. So there are several more trilogies where I sort of have similar experiences with that I could touch on, but I think I'm just going to quickly mention them because I think what I have to say about why I felt the way I felt has kind of already been covered with similar reasons to the other series I've already talked about. And so those series would be Shades of Magic by V.E. Schwab. Definitely book one was my favorite here. The Rhaenyra Revelations by Michael J. Sullivan. So definitely, again, book one was my favorite there, Theft of Swords. Patience of a Dead Man by Michael C. Clarke, a horror trilogy. Book two was my favorite here. You've got the classic Lord of the Rings, Two Towers is my favorite for sure. And lastly, the First Law trilogy, Before They're Hanged, is definitely my favorite of the trilogy. So to kind of sum up, most of the time book one or two is my favorite in a trilogy. So oftentimes I find when book one is my favorite, it's because it has a very solid concept, kind of a more self-contained plot maybe. It deals heavily with introducing a magic system or a concept that's really fleshed out. You're getting characters' fresh reactions to things happening. So everything feels fresh and interesting. A lot of the times foreshadowing is layered in and you're starting to get payoff for things, which is exciting. And then also oftentimes I find that book ones in series can kind of slowly introduce things, have a lot more character focus, and then book two will more go into the meat of a plot of a series and be more exciting, that you'll start getting more payoff for the foreshadowing layered in from book one, that you'll start getting more of a sense of direction in terms of where the series is going, and that can be really exciting. Sometimes in book two, you overcome the main issue that was introduced that really hooked you into the series. And then oftentimes book threes don't work out as well for me. I think a lot of the time they focus on more character moments instead of being so tense or so high stakes. Sometimes the plot changes direction or things expand in scope so much that you don't really feel like you've had time to kind of get oriented in what's happening, or you don't feel like you've had full explanations or full lead up or as much nuance into what's happening in this one as you did with earlier books in the series. Sometimes the foreshadowing in book one and two are so interesting, or there's so many tidbits introduced that you're intrigued by that you have theories about where things should go or how things should be resolved, and book three either ignores that, completely goes in a different direction that you don't like as much, or just doesn't live up to your expectations. And other times book three just doesn't have as much mystery or intrigue left for the series in it. So let me know what you guys think of all this down below. Do you have similar experiences where you tend to enjoy a book one or two in a trilogy more? Is that more of a me thing because I'm more of a plot reader instead of a character reader? Let me know definitely of examples where you've read trilogies where they get better and better, or where book 3 is your favorite, because I want to find more of those. I don't want to get invested in stories that end up letting me down or don't live up to what they could be for me. I would like to have better experiences with trilogies. And on that note, there are a few trilogies I am excited to get to soon that I will quickly mention. So the first one of those is the Eden Saga by Justin Lee Anderson, starting with The Lost War. Also the Ending Fire trilogy by Sarah Elarifi, starting with The Final Strife. And Obsidian Path trilogy, oh my goodness, I still have not gotten there, and people think that that could be a new favorite for me. And I, of course, definitely need to check it out, because it's grimdark and I usually really enjoy dark stuff when I read it. But yeah, let me know in the comments down below. Do you have similar experiences with trilogies? Have you noticed trends like this in the series you read, even if it's not trilogies? And be sure to leave me recommendations of trilogies where book 3 was your favorite, because I want to know. Thank you guys so much for watching, and hope you have a great day. Bye!